Thank you all for joining us here today at the FCCJ. Thank you to Ambassador Emanuel for coming to speak with us today. It's a full crowd. It's great to see everybody here and in person. In terms of the organization today, I'm just going to do a brief introduction and then I'll turn it over to the ambassador to speak about a few different things. First of all, I'd say thank you for coming to the FCCJ. As you know, it is the oldest foreign correspondence club in Asia. And for those of you who are not members and want to be members, it is open to people who are not foreign, and it's open to people who are not correspondents. So you can see the crowd at the front desk if you would like to join. My name is Peter Ahlstrom. By day, I'm executive editor at Bloomberg News here in Tokyo. I'm also president of the Foreign Correspondence Club for this year, so thank you very much. Our guest today probably does not need an introduction for many of you. He is, of course, U.S. Ambassador to Japan. This is his second time at the club, but I want to give a little context before we get started today. He began his career working for local politicians in Chicago, where they take their politics very, very seriously. Some would say it's something of a blood sport. He moved onto the national stage when he helped Bill Clinton win the presidency, and then he joined the White House as special advisor. In 2008, he became chief of staff for President Barack Obama, and in that role, he became what the New York Times called perhaps the most influential chief of staff in a generation. He earned, and let me emphasize the word earned, the nickname Rambo for his tough, take-no-prisoners style with the opposition. In 2011, he was elected mayor of Chicago, and he served for 2 terms. When Emanuel was nominated for the ambassador position in Japan, the reaction was, is it fair to say, mixed? His critics said he was too direct and too abrasive and too insensitive. Emanuel's answered the critics with tireless advocacy for Japan and U.S. relations in a world that he has argued is threatened by autocracies. His Shinkansen diplomacy has made a mark on the public here in Japan, and he's forged a close relationship with the LDP and other parties. It's important to say that Emanuel has not lost his sharp edges, particularly when it comes to China and Russia. He's shown a willingness, perhaps an eagerness, to return to his former combativeness. Just 10 days ago, when the Russian ambassador spoke on this stage, he organized a petition from 42 ambassadors in Japan that the Russian representative answer for the Ukraine invasion. Today, the ambassador will speak about geopolitics, global trade, and the opportunities for Japan and U.S. cooperation. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Emanuel.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank you all for welcoming me back to the Foreign Correspondence Club here in Japan, in Tokyo. The last time I was here in February, which is 10 months ago, and I know for a lot of you it feels like 10 years, but it was 10 months ago. Russia had just invaded Ukraine, a gross violation of international law, an assault on Ukraine's national sovereignty, and a repudiation of the values, principles enshrined in the UN Charter. As Moscow's wanton aggression and illegal war cripple the economy and infrastructure of Ukraine, there is irreparable self-inflicted harm within Russia's own borders. Russia's youth and international corporations are fleeing Putin's Russia, crippling the future of their growing tech sector, all the result of a war of choice by President Putin. Russia's own economy minister has admitted that the Russian economy will shrink 5% this year and is predicting another 4% next year. Back in the United States, an entirely different story and a far more promising story is unfolding. It's a story of revitalization, where our economy in the United States and our political system are stabilizing and growing. 10 million jobs have been created in just the last 2 years, including over 700,000 in the manufacturing sector alone. The unemployment rate is 3.7%, a 50-year low. And as President Biden explained after the recent midterm elections, the American people emphatically rejected election deniers and political violence and reaffirmed the will of the people will prevail. The political system and its legitimacy were accepted. It's been 2 years since 2020 and the January 6 events. The institutions and political norms that make up the American government and political system held and gain strength. I am not a wild-eyed optimist or somebody who usually believes the glass is half full. Our economy is a long way from the COVID trough, and our political system is more secure than we thought possible on the morning of January 7th. The U.S. economy. As President Biden said during a Labor Day speech, we are at an inflection point in American history. As America reaches historic levels of investment, we are now at the 2-year midpoint of the Biden administration. The big pieces of the president's domestic agenda are in place. This seems like an appropriate time to take stock of where we are, given the president's promise to revitalize America and the road ahead. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being invested in America. And while some might have thrown in the towel on American manufacturing, the president did not. He said, quote, "Make it in America," is no longer a slogan, it's a reality in my administration. The maps on either side illustrate the incredible progress being made. $100 million or more in manufacturing, and you can see also those dots are worth more than $100 million. The other impressive map shows investment projects worth $1 billion or more across the United States of America. When he took office, President Biden promised to reinvest in America and rebuild confidence in America. 2 years hence, investments are flowing into America, just as the youth are fleeing Tehran, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. The flow of people and the flow of dollar investments tell the story of where the promise of a future can be realized. The maps show that these investments, some of the most forward-looking, future-focused economic sectors, are taking place from the American Southwest to the Northeast. Political resilience and economic recovery are the heads and tails of the same coin. Here are a few figures of the historic levels of manufacturing and industrial investments in the United States. Semiconductors, more than $264 billion announced. Data centers, more than $39 billion. EV batteries, more than $39 billion. Renewable energy, $8 billion. Healthcare, $3 billion. Those are just some of the sectors that each of these dots represent, not only in dollars, but in thousands and thousands of people going to work. Adding an investment in additional sectors, this map showcases $400 billion in industrial and infrastructure investments under President Biden. What is fueling this economic transformation? The White House has primed the pump on private sector investments through carefully focused, strategic public investments and public R&D dollars in strategic areas. And the American political stability is enabling economic recovery to take hold. In an uncertain world, the dependability of America has its own economic benefits. From data centers to digitization, from electric vehicles to energy batteries, from healthcare to human capital. Every one of these projects represents the private sector dollars chasing public sector investments. First, we're investing in rail, roads, and runways, wind turbines and wires, decarbonization and digital infrastructure. The United States will have a 21st century economy built on a 21st century system, moving at a 21st century speed. Unlike past recoveries, this isn't confined to urban areas. Rural and semi-rural areas are also participating. Second, the CHIPS Act invests in semiconductors and the people and the companies that make them. America has always had a lead here, and now we are repositioning for the next generation of manufacturing and chips. In a post-COVID, post-Chinese coercion, and post-Russian war on Ukraine, we are in the early stages of a significant economic restructuring and transformation so that like-minded countries are never again vulnerable to those who want to upend the global economy or rules that hold it together. These early private sector investments that the map represent build on strategic public investments that are the first signs of that transformation. Third, the U.S. strength in energy. Whether it's nuclear power, SMR technology, our abundance of LNG, EVs, battery storage, hydrogen, ammonia, and the growing renewable sector are enabling us to meet our energy needs and, more importantly, the energy needs of our partners and allies while fighting climate change. America's lead on energy is the new arsenal of democracy that our friends and our allies can count on, especially as they minimize their exposure to malign actors like President Putin, who try to use energy to take other countries hostage. These investments show that American and global companies are trying to get ahead of the economic trends and shape their future through investments in the United States. Second, our democracy. The second factor behind the historic investment boom is the resilience of the American political system and the confidence that comes from that. Now, don't get me wrong. We in the United States have our challenges. We have good days and bad days. But we cannot and should not be blind to what just happened. Democratic norms have been restored and political institutions have been fortified. This year's midterm elections and the elections preceding it had recorded record high voter turnout. And across the nation, the results were accepted peacefully and legitimately. All across America, people of opposing parties and candidates not only accepted victory or defeat, but congratulated the winners and prepared for the peaceful transition of power. We have a tradition in the United States, having run for office myself, wherein you don't succeed, you call the person that did. That happened at every level across the United States. Governors, senators, members of Congress, state legislatures, mayors. And after the election, President Biden called and congratulated Mr. McCarthy and the Republican Party as the new leader of the House. And Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, congratulated Speaker Pelosi on her tenure. While these are just small gestures, they speak volumes about the restoration of political norms in the United States. And the legitimacy of the American example stood tall, and others took note. And the revitalization of the democratic example was not just confined to the United States. Brazil held a national election, a change in power, and it was accepted. In Israel, the same process unfolded. In Italy, the same process unfolded. In France, the same process unfolded. In Sweden, the same process unfolded. They all held national elections and demonstrate the acceptance of the democratic norms is not limited to the United States alone. And I want to share just one anecdote. I hosted the other night African ambassadors at the U.S. Embassy. It was about 10 days before the American election. And one of them pulled me aside and confided in me, quote, "We need the U.S. democratic example as the benchmark for our own democracy to succeed." So while it was held in the United States, the meaning and purpose of that election was not limited to the shores of the United States. Our political and economic revitalization is fueling growing global support for the United States. According to a Pew survey released earlier this year, average U.S. favorability in 17 countries was over 60%. A massive recovery after the all-time low ratings in 2020. Reliability on the United States to do the right thing is also up to almost 80%. And in the same Pew poll, only 18% of the world's population in those countries said they had confidence in China of doing the right thing regarding world affairs. So the United States is also winning the hearts and minds of the publics throughout the world and other countries as it relates to who will do the right thing for world affairs. What does a stable democracy mean for an economy? Everything. Businesses are in the business of mitigating risk. Systems defined by the rule of law and transparency reassure shareholders, corporate boards, and markets. The American brand has been strengthened under President Biden. By the way, this isn't true for China under President Xi. There's a predictability premium that exists in the market, and the United States is a beneficiary of the value placed on predictability and stability. This may sound a bit jingoistic, but America isn't just a safe bet. It's the best bet. And don't take my word for it. Take a look at the maps. They speak volumes about that bet. Autocracies offer none of these things. Tehran, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Moscow, St. Petersburg, they all have one thing in common. Their youth, their entrepreneurs, their future want to get out and are fleeing to go to a place with better prospects for a better future. Fleeing to places that respect the potential of individuals and where the rule of law is upheld. In the United States, we have much work to do to achieve the promise of a more perfect union. And that work goes on daily, in fits and in starts. We in the United States have good days and bad days of that effort. But it's a marathon race with no finish line. But after the last 2 years, I can say with confidence, the United States pace has picked up in those last 2 years. And the people are not fleeing America on planes, trains, and automobiles in search of political freedom and economic opportunity. They are fleeing Tehran, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. Of late, we've heard about climate refugees. The youth of Hong Kong, Tehran, Shanghai, Moscow, and St. Petersburg are political and economic refugees. The challenge for America is the amount of people that want to enter it, not those who want to flee it. Sometimes we all lose sight of what's happening right in front of us. Third, the opportunities for Japan. So what does the rediscovered confidence in American democracy and the American economy mean for the U.S.-Japan trade and investment cooperation in future-focused sectors? Japan is already the #1 investor in America for the last 4 years. And by the way, America is the #1 investor in Japan. Even so, there's incredible untapped capacity to invest in America, and Japanese companies are coming to discover America's predictability premium. A few examples: in July, Panasonic announced a $4 billion investment in a batteries factory in Kansas that will power electric cars of the future. Likewise, this year, Honda announced a $700 million investment in Ohio. Fujifilm is building a $2 billion facility in Holy Springs, North Carolina. It's going to be the North American's largest cell cultural biopharmaceutical facility. Why does the American market appeal to Japanese companies? America is a country governed by the rule of law, characterized by transparency, which gives Japanese companies the certainty they need when they invest. Before this new era of global economic restructuring, investors sought out exotic locations and high-risk markets for big returns based on the principles of cost and efficiency. That's no longer the rules. As we are seeing in Russia, China, and in Tehran or Hong Kong, political instability and autocracy are bad for the bottom line. America's historic public investment in strategic sectors offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in a rules-respecting country with high returns. I hope that's not an editorial, that beep. 10 years ago, the U.S. imported LNG. Now we're one of the largest exporters and producers of LNG in the world. The U.S. has helped Europe with its energy needs, and we can also provide Japan a reliable energy supply as well. The American market is attractive to Japan's multinational corporations, but increasingly for small and medium-sized businesses as well. America's small business, they drive about 2/3 of the new jobs and almost half of our country's economic activity. Over the past 2 years, under President Biden's leadership, America's political and economic stability have created an enabling environment for historic investment gains. On January 6, almost 2 years ago, the confidence in America and its democratic system and political norms was shaken. Many thought our knees would buckle under the weight of the riots. But since that time, we've had elections featuring historic large turnouts. No violence, no second guessing of the results. The process of accountability has begun. America's long been a good place to invest and do business. We were, and we continue to be strong, and we're only getting stronger. Our allies and our partners are part of that strength, such as the expansion of NATO to include Sweden and Finland. And it's our commitment to double down on our alliances, which our strength is drawn from. We are founded on a system of rights and responsibilities that enable individuals to maximize their potential. Our university system and entrepreneurial spirit ensure we lead in knowledge and innovation. Our openness to international collaboration and protection of intellectual property drive a world-class collaboration and results. Just in the past few weeks, we've had midterm elections. The United States has participated in the Climate Change Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, East Asia Summit, the G20, and APEC multilateral summits. We've seen Micron, a U.S.-based semiconductor, launch its expanded semiconductor fabrication facility in Hiroshima. We've seen the United States and Japan sign a historic Gateway Lunar Agreement and exploration. And on the same day, Japan announced and confirmed its intent to continue to support the International Space Station to 2030. We are modernizing the United States-Japan relationship to maximize our alliance's potential in order for both countries and the peoples that make up those countries to make the most of this unprecedented restructuring in the world economy. In short, we in the United States are more sure-footed, more stable, and are rebuilding. And we are once again claiming our role of leadership in the world, something we have to earn every day. I can say to you that 2 years into the administration, our political system, our economy, our alliances, and our standing in the world have all been fortified and strengthened. We have much work ahead of us, but after 2 years of the Biden administration, we are well positioned to make the most of what lies ahead if we stay focused on the task ahead. If we do that, 2022 will be remembered in history for exactly what President Biden noted, that we are at an inflection point and it's once again tipping in America's favor. The future is still built in America. When America is strong, our allies like Japan are even stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. You covered a lot of territory. We do have plenty of time for questions, fortunately. I will begin by asking a few of them. I've also been given a few that came in online. I surveyed the Twitterati to ask a few questions, so we have some surprising ones that'll come. But very shortly thereafter, I'll turn it over to people in this room. So if you do have questions, please raise your hands, or you can also line up at the microphones. I'd begin with a question about politics.
What a shock.
You say the U.S. has turned a corner in terms of democracy. I actually counted the days. It's been less than 2 years. It's been 684 days since January 6th. Since the midterm elections, Donald Trump has declared he will run for president again. Elon Musk has decided that it's okay for Donald Trump to return to Twitter, the cesspool that has become Twitter, at least for American politics and probably global politics. Is it too soon to declare victory?
It's a good question. I said we were getting fortified and strengthened. I didn't say, I don't think you can look at the entire speech and I said victory. Never said it. But I do think if you take a short, 2 years in the span of human history is a blink of the eye. Where we are today is not where you would have thought of, as I said in the speech, on the morning of January 7th. As a person who served in the House of Representatives, who's the son and grandson of an immigrant, to have seen what happened on January 6th in the United States of America, when my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, fled the pogroms of Eastern Europe, never would have thought. But I don't think you can lose stock of what happened. When you have record turnout of an election, it means people have confidence in the system. And it wasn't just in the midterm. That was true in the elections that were held a year into the president for both governors of Michigan, of New Jersey and Virginia. There were special elections for Congress. There was a referendum in Kansas on an abortion plank to the Constitution, and then the midterm. And not only was there elections, but the process I describe in the speech that happens afterwards that only a candidate knows, where somebody that loses calls, where President Biden reached out to Congressman McCarthy, who will be the next Speaker of the House, in the same way that Senate Minority Leader McConnell reached out to Nancy Pelosi. Those small gestures talk about a return to the norms and the institutions held. And so I never in the speech ever once used the word victory. But I do think we've covered a long journey from the trough of January 6th to where we are today. And I don't think, not just in the United States, you didn't ask this, but by citing what happened in Brazil a week before ours, a switch in government, in Israel, a switch in government, in France, where Macron, one of the first presidents in French modern history, not modern history, but in last 2 decades, to get reelected, Sweden, Denmark. The norms of democracy, when basically 2 years ago a lot of people thought the best days were behind it, all I said was they are getting stronger. And I stand by that. And I also think 2 years ago everybody says autocracies were the future. Well, you better tell the 1 million youth that fled St. Petersburg and Moscow that that's where they've just left the future behind. They don't seem to agree with that. Or the people that got on boats in Hong Kong and left because autocracy's best days were ahead of it. No, they left risking life and limb because they didn't see a future in Hong Kong. Go tell the kids in Tehran, who for 2 straight months have stood up to a government that is shooting and killing its own citizens on the streets, that the future is in Tehran. They just don't know it. So I would say to you, from the trough of January 6th to where we are today, democracies are getting stronger. We have work ahead of us, as I noted. And I would tell you that the people that are fleeing those cities are fleeing it because they don't see a future for themselves. They see actually the walls coming in on that future.
Thank you. I read more Chinese state media than I'd like to admit.
Well, then this is therapy for you.
And the Chinese state media very actively will make the case that what has happened in the U.S. is an example of democracy's shortcomings and failings. And they will argue that what the Communist Party has done with economic growth in particular in that country is a demonstration of how their style of government can be a model for other countries around the world. They, of course, are now going through very serious COVID lockdowns that have hurt their economy, undercut some of that growth. As you point out, the U.S. has made progress since January 6th in reestablishing a semblance of stability. What do you think the U.S. needs to do in the, say, 2 years ahead to the presidential election to demonstrate that position as a model?
Well, first of all, you earn that every day, which is why I cited the example in the Pew poll that was a global poll. 80% of the world population, or nearly 80, thinks the United States will do the right thing for world affairs. That's in the teens for China. Now look, the Chinese people, separate from the Communist Party, the Chinese people have a lot to offer. Rich history, great culture, an incredible work ethic, and great innovations. It's the Chinese Communist Party that is suppressing that. Why is it that they don't take a COVID vaccine that's proven to work better than theirs? And they're holding back not only their economy, but their people, who are repelling against the suppression of the COVID posture. And the Chinese Communist Party, as you talk about what they have done, yes, they have been a beneficiary of the global world order and rule system that they are now trying to undermine, rather than be invested in the success. Yes, the international system, which they joined, helped them take millions of people out of poverty and bring them into the middle class. Rather than uphold those and strengthen them, they're trying to undermine it. Japan, where we are in 2015, we're the first country to be a victim of Chinese economic coercion. In the last 2 years, that's true about Australia. After that was South Korea, Lithuania. Not only economic coercion because they disagree with you politically, then they try to force you and break you through that economic coercion. They also constantly practice intellectual property theft and also economic espionage. President Xi looked President Obama in the eye and said, we will never militarize the islands. That's exactly what they did. Philippines took them to the World Maritime Court on the issues of the islands around the Philippines. The court ruled in Philippines' favor. China said, we're not acknowledging that decision or participating, even though they're part of the international system. So at what point do you say, they told the UK, we'll have one country, two systems when it came to Hong Kong. And they totally threw that out the box. There's a pattern here, and you need to be aware of the pattern. And the fact is, the Chinese system works great for China. It has nobody else in interest. Now, we just finished on announcing a joint agreement on the Gateway lunar exploration with Japan. Japan signed on with other countries into the International Space Station. That's on behalf of the world community. China is exploring space for China and for China alone and for China's benefit. The technology, the innovations, the discoveries of the International Space Station, of lunar exploration, will be shared with the world community. That's just not true of how China operates. That's a reflection of a different perspective and a different role that the United States and or China and the United States and its allies have to the world community.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask two economics questions, and then I'll open it up to people in the room. So please bear with me. First, globalization has been an incredibly powerful force over the past 30 years. We've seen it transform the global economy. Much of that has been behind China's success, and it's also driven profits in the United States and in Japan also. It does appear that with the tensions between the US and China, we're moving away from the old model of globalization. You're alluding to a new model of globalization here, or a new model. How would you describe it, and what do you think the rules of the road are for this new model?
Well, there's a couple. Well, first, let me say this. There was a model of globalization. I don't accept that the world's going into deglobalization. I think it's going into another generation. I would say 3 to 4 things. The old model ran on cost and efficiency as the North Stars. The new model's running on stability and sustainability. Those are the new North Stars. That's what that represents. You're going to go where there's stability. You're going to go where there's sustainability, and cost and efficiency will not be the only driving factor. And there's 2 major articles in major journals today referring to that. One in the FT and one in the Wall Street Journal. I'm hoping that Bloomberg catches up with that. Second, one of the driving kind of principles in the past was market access. I think market access was to the last 30 years what energy security and stability will be to the next 30 years. And that's one of the strengths the United States has, both not only for the United States, for manufacturing, for the economy, but also for our allies and friends, is our energy abundance, not just in LNG, but nuclear technology, SMR technology, hydrogen, ammonia. You go down the, renewables. Third, I would say that in the past 30 years, you used to measure international economics by how much you sold. That still counts, but I actually think it's how much data you collect that will be important going forward. There's no sector, no company, multinational, that is not in the data business and collection. And fourth, we have to acknowledge, I would say, the shortcomings of the old model. It was not inclusive. It actually was exclusive. While other countries like China participated, succeeded, Brazil, the BRIC countries that are noted. When President Biden talked about Build Back Better, or Prime Minister Kishida talked about new capitalism, or Boris Johnson talked about leveling up, or President Xi talked about shared prosperity, they were all scratching the same itch. That we had, yes, globalization was successful, but the risk and opportunities were not equally shared. And I think one of the differences this map shows and what I try to highlight is President Biden's success in making sure that there are more people participating in the winner's circle of economic revitalization and renaissance. And the challenges for developed economies is making sure not only is there growth, but that growth is shared by making sure people have the education, the skills, in a period of time where you earn what you learn, that we have more educational opportunities, more attempts to make sure that people participate in the opportunities that are abundant in a globalized economy, and that they have not only the education, but they have the security that when things aren't succeeding, that they don't fall through. And so I would say that, without repeating, but to go over quickly, cost and efficiency are being replaced by stability and sustainability. Energy stability is going to be more important than just market access was to the last 30 years. And it's not just how much you sell, it's how much data you collect. And fourth is that it has to be an inclusive economic growth, not exclusive.
Okay, thank you. And then one question that came in online, this is from Anthony Rowley from the South China Morning Post. He asks also an economic question that follows after this. How do you think the U.S. economy will hold up with rising interest rates, still the threat of inflation, and economists predicting a recession, and what will happen to the American dollar?
Well, let me just say this. There's a lot smarter people than Rahm Emanuel to answer all that. I think I can't answer that. And it's not mine. What I can answer is whether you're making the right strategic investments, not for the short term, but for the long term. I think when you look at what the president's done on the infrastructure bill, modernizing our roads, our rails, our runways, making sure that on the critical piece of the economy, semiconductor and chips, We're investing in that future collectively, both the private and public sector. Making sure that we're doing the right type of things on energy for the transition to a more energy efficient economy that has a stronger renewable piece. Those are all the right things for the future. Where interest rates are going, what does that mean for the recession? There's a lot smarter people that follow that, know that, and understand that. I'm not, I mean, I have my view, but it's from reading other things. And you really want that, I'll get your Larry Summers cell phone and you can call him.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions in the room? Please. Please state your name and publication as you ask your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your encouraging remarks, particularly focusing on the resilience of your democracy. My name is Shukawa Kita, senior staff writer with Kyoto. I have a question on the China-Russia relationship. After the CCP's party congress was over, China is now apparently trying to mend, improve ties with the West. As we know,
With
the West.
With West.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure I heard
Yeah,
that
including
right.
all of us in the room. As we know, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, some other leaders met with President Xi earlier this month, and your state Secretary of State is going to be flying over to Beijing sometime soon. And China also, in my view, trying to keep a distance, slight distance from Moscow. Xi Jinping conveyed, President Xi Jinping conveyed concern and doubt over to the Putin in Samarkand in September, and he hasn't mentioned so-called the limited partnership for some time. However, I don't see any positive sign or concrete action that China is trying to facilitate some positive steps like facilitating dialogue between Russia and Ukraine. Although China has leverage with both with Russia and Ukraine. My question is, how do you see the Chinese diplomatic maneuvering these days?
Okay.
Are they trying to do something positive in ending the war? Thank you.
Thanks. So here's, I mean, just as an outside observer, I think President Xi took note of the damage that the wolf warrior and economic coercion has done to China. That's what I think. And I think it's an attempt to airbrush those out of people's memory. When only 18% of the world thinks that China will do the right thing for world affairs, that tells you something. The entire strategy of being a wolf warrior, coercing Australia, Lithuania, isolating Japan, boycotting South Korean companies, bringing Sri Lanka to its knees based on debt. That's also true for other countries in Africa. Declaring total China 2025, we're going to be self-sufficient in everything, not dependent on the world. That go-alone approach has damaged China, not just its brand, but its economy. So I think its recent moves are an attempt to airbrush the wolf warrior and China's economic coercion out. That's number one. Number two, I think the rest of the world is up to understanding that we're not just going to look at your words, but your deeds. And third, I'll just take a different approach. While I note that President Xi has said that spoken ill of use of nuclear weapons, to me, if you really said that your relationship with Russia has no limits, then why don't you try to limit Russia's war by ending it? Get on the bandwagon. The damage done to the world economy, the damage done to the other parts of the world for the type of food shortages are all a result of this war. It's a war of choice, and it's in direct violation of the UN Charter that Russia's a signing to. China has untapped capability as it relates to Russia, and they have not tapped it yet.
I want to jump in with one question that we got online because it's related to this. We have seen, of course, North Korea fire an increasing number of missiles, including last week near Japan. What do you think the U.S. and Japan can and should do to negotiate with, I'm sorry, I should have identified. This is from Pio D'Amelia from Sky TG 24. And the question is, what do you think the U.S. and Japan should do in order to restart negotiations or negotiate with North Korea? And what role could China play in those negotiations?
Well, let me take this out. China can play a very significant role because what North Korea is doing as it relates to both ROK and Japan, America's principal allies here in the region, is threatening. That's why we're up making sure that our deterrence, our security is up to the task ahead. China has a very significant role on both politically, economically with the DPRK, and they have not exercised it to the full potential. And I would say the most important thing, the president has indicated he's ready for negotiations with the DPRK, but he's also committed to the security of our two most important Asian allies and partners, ROK and Japan.
More questions, please? Yeah.
Make sure people ask questions.
Mitsuya Boto. My nickname is Scape, as in scapegoat. I'm a life
She's going to help you. There.
I'm a life member of this club. Actually, in 1969, I was invited to join Nissan Motor Company and became in charge of its international division. So I joined this club as an associate member. But some 10 years ago, they made me honorary member.
If you could
Okay.
ask a question, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But anyway, I have written letters to both of you, and had no response. Around 1974, I started committing to Washington once a month and negotiate with governors of some 7 or 8 states, including Big Jim Thompson of Illinois. In the end, I played Governor Rahm Alexander of Tennessee against Georgia Governor George Busby.
Why don't we do this?
Recommended that Nissan invest in Smyrna, Tennessee.
Okay.
All of our supplier companies followed our suit,
Thank you.
including
Yeah.
British.
I will. How about this? I'll meet with you afterwards. Let me do that.
Question.
Yeah. What's the
Or
question?
the request I have is, I've been talking to Mr. Kimata, chairman of Kubota in Osaka, asking him to invest in
Okay.
Crawfordsville, Indiana.
Thank you. I'm sorry. We're going to move on to the next.
To manufacture
Okay.
large-size agricultural tractors. Okay.
Saikawa-san will help you with the question. Okay, we can talk afterwards. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did want to ask one specific energy question. This is from my colleague Isabel Reynolds about energy security. And you mentioned that the U.S. Could be a stable supplier of energy to Japan. What's the status of discussions on increasing LNG production and supplying more to Japan?
Well, they're first of all very active. Thank you so much. Very active and ongoing discussions about how the United States abundance in LNG can play a role in stabilizing Japan's LNG needs and capacities. As probably people have seen, the United States is playing a very, very big role in replacing Russia for Europe. I think there's a real potential for the United States to play that role for not only Japan's energy needs, but also for Japan to become a major energy hub into the Indo-Pacific with that. Second is, let me take this question a little farther. I give Prime Minister Kishida a lot of credit on his announcement before the upper house on restarting Japan's nuclear facilities. I know it has a lot of political challenges, but it's been forthright and honest with the people of Japan, what Japan needs for its own energy security. Second, Japan has about a 20-year head start on hydrogen, which is, I think, going to be playing an incredibly and more important role as it relates to industrial energy needs. And Japan is way ahead of the rest of the world, and its engineering know-how, technological research is going to pay to Japan's benefit. Third, in the EV space, there are 3 Japanese companies that are number 1, 2, and 3 worldwide in holding patents in EVs. Fourth, in the area of small nuclear, the United States and Japan are partners in probably 2 companies that are the most promising for SMR technology in the globe, which I think will be realized by the rest as a more important part of our climate commitment and energy needs. So I think there's a lot. And then on the renewable space, Japan's research in batteries, solar, its coastline for wind, give it a promise and a potential in the whole renewable space. So the work we're doing, we held about 3 weeks ago a big meeting on LNG, and we're going to be doing that again in about 2 more weeks of where the United States can be a supplier long term. We already represent 11%. We could be even bigger for Japan, so it has what it needs for its own energy security, stability, and is not dependent on any country that will try to blackmail it as it relates to energy.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to talk about a couple other areas of potential cooperation. You mentioned the CHIPS Act in particular. The Biden administration, of course, passed the CHIPS Act and then later imposed export curbs on China that were surprisingly rigorous. I think they surprised everybody in how restrictive those steps were. It stops many American chips companies from exporting to Chinese chip companies. It also stops Americans from working at many Chinese chip companies. There has been tensions with allies, including Japan and the Netherlands, over whether they will take the same steps and take a similar stance with respect to China. Could you talk about what the status of that is right now and whether you expect the allies to be able to reach consensus?
No, I can't.
There's a lot of warm-up.
No. Let's go next, please. So, look, here's what I would say. I think, as I say in the remarks, I really kind of look at this moment as we're in a major restructuring and transformation. The semiconductors is where there's a lot of attention, but that's just one aspect of the economy. Energy is another one. Nobody in Europe ever again is going to become dependent on Russian LNG. Not going to happen. In the same way that on semiconductors and chips, we're not going to, the developed world who share like-minded and a certain value system are not going to become that economically dependent on a critical piece of the world economy, on those who wish not only ill, but will not play by the same amount of rules. So the CHIPS Act is what the United States is doing for the United States and like-minded countries. Japan is also taking, and come on the heels of having been down in Hiroshima midweek last week, where a major expansion in 1B capacity here in Japan was done by a U.S. company with the support of METI. The largest foreign company to invest in Japan is a U.S. company called Micron. They employ 4,500 Japanese at their facilities. Not to do an advertisement here, but of the last 1,500 people that hired by Micron, 40% are women, making major contribution to the economy here. And Japan's doing what Japan should rightfully do as part of a like-minded country. They're investing, I think there was an announcement, I'm pronouncing it correct, Rapsidus, 8 Japanese companies with IBM, US-based company, in the next generation microchips. Europe is doing similar things because nobody in this transformation period or this restructuring is becoming vulnerable to countries that clearly want to do you ill. And those negotiations will happen with allies as we look to the future. Now, I also think what the president announced was a reaction to what China said, which is China 2025. They will not be dependent on any other country. They will own their steps for their self-sufficiency and will do whatever it takes to do that. The president's point of view is, given the importance of chips, we're not going to help you beat us. We're not against competition, but we're not going to assist you in beating us. That's what he did. And it was a response to President Xi's announcement of what China 2025 is, which is self-sufficiency in this area, to dominate it. When China tries to dominate something, it's not just a sector, it's you. And they've said it, and they've done it time and again, and the president's saying that those days are over.
It seems, if I can delve into the tensions just a little bit more on the chip front.
You seem like a middle child.
I am a middle child.
Yeah, I picked that up there pretty quickly.
All right. So the tensions with the allies on the chip front, I think, come down to the fact that the U.S., the Biden administration, has decided to set these rules, and they had sought cooperation from Japan as well as from the Netherlands to set the same kinds of restrictions. I think the pushback in Japan and the tensions are that, first of all, it's not the United States' decision to make about what kind of rules other countries actually follow. That's sort of step one. And then the second concern is that in the past, they've seen American companies then go to the Commerce Department or state or whoever's actually managing it and get exceptions so they can continue to do business while the Japanese companies feel like they're following the rules. Yeah. How do we avoid that kind of
no, look, here's, I suppose the best way to kind of look at this is, I would say that when you're in the middle of a significant transformation from one kind of modus operandi to another, it's not ever clean. The United States respects the contributions that our ally and the companies that make up Japan's economy contribute. That's also true for the ROK, and that's also true for Taiwan. We're going to work with our allies as we make this transition and transformation and this restructuring together. But we're going to, the United States, given the size of our economy, given the technological capacity of the United States, are going to take a lead. We will work with them, but the old days will leave us way too vulnerable to a country that is clearly doing us ill and not playing by the same amount of rules. So.
Okay. I'm going to ask two last questions. I'm getting time right here. Do you have time for two questions?
Yeah.
One's very quick.
Well,
The
question may be quick. Who knows what the answer
no,
will
I think
be?
the answer will be quick. Two people asked,
Yeah.
will you run for president?
No.
And if so, when?
No.
Okay, this is the quick one.
Well, yeah.
The longer term one, I think, came from someone who must not pay very close attention to your Twitter feed. They said, has the ambassador ever ridden the Shinkansen in Japan? Which I can
Yes.
testify if you pay any attention to his Twitter feed that he has, and he's taken many, many pictures of it, including to Kyoto. If there's cooperation between the U.S. and Japan, is there a scenario where you can get that kind of technology to the United States, where the rail system, I would say, is
I'll
wanting?
say it. We have a lot to learn from Japan's rail system. As a person, I've taken the train my whole life. I took it twice a week from my home to work, the Chicago, and I'm very proud of what we did in Chicago, modernizing the system. Japan's urban and between cities intra-rail system is a gold standard that everybody should be benchmarked against. And Japan has every right and should be incredibly proud of the system between cities and the system in a city. I've taken both the what I would call the subway, but your Tokyo system. I've taken the system in Kobe. I've taken the system in other parts of the, just recently down to Hiroshima. I took the rail system there, the tram. And then I've taken the Shinkansen between cities. There's nothing like it. And I've taken trains all over the world, and I've taken it. Two, I know that both Maryland and I think there's a system being built talking about the technology from DC to New York and within Texas. And the company here in Japan is working aggressively to be part of building that system that would be, I think, in Texas between Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio. Senator Cornyn was here 4 or 5 months ago meeting on that. So was Senator Cardin from Maryland meeting on that. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and that would be a place where the Japanese technology would make a major contribution to the infrastructure and economic development of the United States. And I'm just saying the system is a tremendous system, and one that I think is the gold standard that we all get benchmarked after.
Great. Thank you for being here
Thank
with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.